Hey everyone, welcome back to CryptoCache. Thank you so much for joining me here. I hope you're having a phenomenal day. Let's take a quick look here at crypto market overview. We're obviously going to look at Bitcoin and then, well, a reverse situation here too that's forming. While this isn't perfect and patterns are never exact, we do have some divergences here with an overextension on Bitcoin to the upside. So we might see some downside this weekend or a sideways chop. We're going to double check that and much more. Obviously look at some backend data here too as well with some order blocks, mostly just kind of focusing on Bitcoin dominance and altcoin dominance, and then just generally kind of touching on some heavy liquidation levels here, and of course, some CryptoNet ETF inflows and outflows, kind of what that means for us here. So be sure to stick around. We got a good one today. Let's take a look. All right, folks, before we jump into the back-end juicy liquidation data, I'd like to touch on a few important things here, just kind of give you an update on what happened the last 24 hours. First of all, starting with our crypto Twitter here. This is all available on my Twitter. Links down below if you're curious. President Trump had an announcement yesterday, or multiple announcements. The two major ones was anti-cartel military escalation regarding the armed conflict, and of course, U.S.-Canada trade talks being terminated there as well. So those are some fundamental catalysts. We saw some price action resulting that. I would say the biggest one was CZ being pardoned by Trump, which basically is a pretty big deal there. So that is why we saw a pretty significant uptick for the price of BNB. And if you're not familiar, you weren't part of our trade community there, we secured some nice profits on a long for Bitcoin this morning and XRP as well, 31 and 21%. But there's a BNB trade there. We hit 3 out of 4 targets at 46% based on that nice little pump there from that fundamental catalyst, right? So those are good things there overall. Obviously, Solana profits too. But when we circle back around to kind of some fundamentals, this morning we also saw inflation higher up there, basically with CPI data coming through. So those things all kind of factor in. So we're kind of starting to see that decrease in value for the moment, and that's just kind of a normal common thing. Quickly before we get going, hit the like button, comment below, folks. Really appreciate you doing so. Really helps continue to grow the channel. Thank you to those who have been consistently doing that. You're an amazing part of my life. I deeply appreciate you, and welcome on board if you are new to the channel. Generally, I like to look at order blocks just to get some perspective on how tight the margins are between the price action. We do have some pretty significant sell orders further away from the price at about 112,000. So that's somewhat of a secondary resistance for us. We've known that for a while. There's a lot of liquidation at 112. That's why we saw that sweep of liquidation for Bitcoin just a little bit ago. That's actually right where our take profit target was. We look at 111,000. We can see that's kind of the chunk of change there, and then 109.5. So we're kind of right in the middle of that, of course. That doesn't tell us a heck of a lot, but once more, 108 and 112 are the outliers there, helping us understand that there's more price action or intention to sell or buy at 108 to 112. And we'll probably be able to see that or highlight that on the liquidation levels too. Usually there's some areas of liquidation and open interest in those ranges. Now take a look here. This is Bitcoin dominance versus stable ETH and altcoin dominance. So on the bottom right, we can see altcoins kind of pulling back for their market cap, which is pretty consistent with the fact that we're seeing money flowing into stablecoin. So as money flows away from Bitcoin and altcoins, it's going into stablecoin here, that dry powder for either A, the weekend, or B, early next week. All right. I'm speculating we're going to see some sideways price action this weekend, just based on the simple fact that we have this, it's a very unique, it was a weird week, right? We kind of saw a lot of choppy behavior throughout the week. So generally speaking, there's going to be some indecision over the weekend. That's typically how it works. It's very uncommon for a trend to be established on a weekend. So just be mindful of that. Take a look here at the liquidation heat map for the last 24 hours. We're closer to the lower side here, so it'd be safer to say that 109K should be the next consideration or target there for Bitcoin. And secondary to that, 112.4 is that upper area liquidation. Look, in the last 7 days, it's starting to pile up down below. We were also at a 9 on TD sequential here. We've been moving for 36 hours in the same direction. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see the price pull back with that head and shoulders pattern in a smaller time frame. Once more, patterns are not exactly the reason why prices move, but it just helps you understand weakness and strength in certain areas. And that's what we're going to try to identify today. We also want to look at the 30-day time frame. This is pretty sporadic. There's a lot of little chunks here and there. But roughly 109K is that heavy concentration below, and then 106.6 as well, which is really close to that local low for us for Bitcoin. So we got some outliers there. And once more, as per usual, 112.4 We're just a little bit over that $112,000 range for the liquidation on the upside. All right, now when we take a look here the last 24 hours, this just gives us perspective that we have a little bit more liquidation left to the downside here. So the consideration is to be safer than sorry, and basically just kind of wait for a better long position, or try to make sure you trade with intelligence instead of emotion, right? It's a big difference. Now taking a look here at the last 24 hours, liquidation for ETH is pretty much at a break even. Bitcoin has 2-to-1 ratio for shorts versus longs getting liquidated. That was that push or that pump up to that 112K range. And then majority of alts are not really a super huge ratio there overall. So no super significant outliers just from the bird's eye view here. The only outliers I see here is just kind of a flat ETF net inflow or outflow for the week, right? We can see basically Ethereum, the blue lines here. That is essentially telling us that we have more outflow for ETH than we do Bitcoin. And that's easily identified here too as well, because ETH is this one on the bottom left. We can see, generally speaking, we're seeing a somewhat of a consistent downtrend for Ethereum and its market capitalization. So money's flowing away from ETH, if you will. Now back into this chart here, just kind of touch on it. We're still in a fearish type of market, so i.e. that's a concept to consider buying. And when I say consider, I'm not saying take a 100x leverage trade to the upside right now with your entire portfolio. That's just dumb to do no matter what the conditions are. However, at this point, when we're in a fearish type of market, the overall sense is to consider buying in. And we've seen a lot of stablecoin, basically stablecoins are starting to bottom out in a lot of ways. They've hit their local bottoms. They've hit their potential shift in momentum, right? We're also seeing this divergence too, it's a convergence where the price action for a lot of descending trend lines are being broken. That, in combination with the fear index being kind of low, leads me to believe I feel like we're going to go higher. That's basically the concept. Now, it's not like we can't continue to go lower first, which I think we do have a short-term correction here, but the overall sense is buy the fear, sell the greed. That's the concept. And mostly referring to like a spot bag type of scenario here, okay? Altcoin season index is not looking fantastic here in this sense. Obviously, we've dropped below or pretty much maintaining right at that 1.5 trillion mark, which is still a good place to be, don't get me wrong. But if you look, majority of altcoins are underperforming versus Bitcoin right now. So we saw a pretty significant correction. Obviously, you've known that, and that's happened the last few weeks here, but the general concept here is that once again, when the altcoin season index is low, that's generally a good time to buy because there's more propensity for them to go higher. I'm mostly referring to the top 100, not the ridiculous, stupid, like super tiny market cap coins. Be very careful trading those. All right, so that's kind of the concept there. What else is a cool concept is just this awesome reward bonus here for Bitunix. I've been able to negotiate a pretty awesome trade bonus and deposit rewards here. So be sure to check that out. It's available between now and the end of November. Okay. And there's also further details too. All this information is down below, but it's a pretty straightforward little situation. But use my link to register. You'll always be eligible for these monthly competitions and bonuses that we have. And it's just easy money. It's just so, it's awesome because you can have the opportunity to be able to just kind of get some extra little benefit for no effort at all. Basically, just keep doing what you're doing. I don't want you to be incentivized to try to overtrade though, so make sure you don't do that. But all that said, there's nice benefits there. We're going to circle back around to this here a little bit later, but I do want to touch on the liquidation and open interest for Bitcoin. It's still looking pretty decent in the overall sense. Once again, we got 113.5 to 115. That's that upper local high range. So I do think those we have more propensity to go to that level here soon. When we look at the liquidation delta, we're still in the green. It's not super strong at about 2 billion, but that's still good. And then when we look at our left-hand side here, those last 7 days worth of liquidation, or correction, actually that's the last month rather. Let's go this. I want to look at the 7 days because identifying what happened in the last week is important. We do have a lot more liquidation to the downside here, once again between 106 and 104. Now that doesn't mean we're just going to go right there immediately or that's ever going to happen. It just implies there's a lot of strength there because of the simple fact that people were buying that dip here, and anyone who has a high leverage long from the 106K range, 107K range has a liquidation event below that. And that's just kind of, it's nothing to really write home about. This isn't like something that we need to worry about. I think in due time, we could see that happen, especially if this this regular head and shoulders pattern comes to fruition. That would put us right down here with a descending trend line of just a retest that 106K range. So I do think still that 106K is a possibility. Now let's explain, or talk about why that may or may not be the case. So if we look at the daily time frame here, Let's actually go back to this other chart here because I want to understand the macro structures breaking bullish, right? So the quick summary here for Bitcoin, if you want to just kind of have one or understand kind of what we're looking at here, the larger time frames are still bearish in the macro structure as far as like trying to shift momentum. Like the weekly and the 3-day, they're holding well in their range, but there's propensity to continue lower based on momentum, all right? I don't buy into that too much because the daily time frame here kind of tells us a little bit better of a story here where we're above the 200-day SMA. That's a good sign in most cases. But generally speaking, when we look at the daily time frame, we want to identify, being above 50 on the RSI, which we aren't there yet, right? That's why we're breaking bullish. We're not there yet. But we can see stochastic swinging up, kind of giving us good momentum. We're establishing higher highs and higher lows on the 4-hour time frame. MACD's converging to, or at least once again, soon to converge rather. We're probably a few days off from that, but the concept here is that we're shifting that momentum, okay? We've broken our descending trend line. That's kind of the starting point, and then establishing higher highs and higher lows to follow is important. We haven't established higher highs and higher lows specifically on the daily time frame yet. Once more, that 100,000 point, sorry, it's 110.6. Let's round up and say 111,000. That's an easy number to remember. We haven't closed above 111,000 yet in the last 7 to 10 trading days. So until we do, we got to treat that like a resistance, okay? So to me personally, getting above 111 is a super important deal. Now, when we take a look here at the lower time frames, just say the 4-hour time frame, you can see that we're reaching an overextended state. So previously, right here at this range of 111,000, we can see we hit a 9 on TD sequential, so we moved for 36 hours in the same direction. We pulled back, we ripped up a little bit further to sweep the late shorts, and then of course the price rips down to sweep the late longs. It's kind of standard trading 101, right? That's very normal market maker behavior. But the concept here is that we've also rallied back up to hit another 9 on TD sequential, basically implying that we have a short-term reversal on our hands. We're more likely to go down in the short term because of that, right? We hit our local high, as well as the simple fact that we're overextended leading into it. So just to kind of clarify, in case you're not familiar, generally speaking, head and shoulders patterns aren't patterns because they look cool and they're something that somebody feels like it's going to be a good call just to take a trade on it, right? The reason why this is important is because head and shoulder patterns are really good about sweeping specific areas. In other words, overextending, pulling back, and then ripping those late shorts and then ripping the late longs here. That rinse and repeat. We retry again, and in some cases it fails and the price action comes down. So hypothetically, we're going to go lower if we cannot reclaim 111,000. That's kind of the concept there. So that number to me is important. If we somehow get a closure of 111,000 or higher by this time tomorrow, that may be a decent sign to consider some longs depending on how altcoins are performing versus Bitcoin. But between now and then, the next 24 hours, you should be sitting on your hands and waiting for better opportunities. This doesn't really seem like a good transition to trade. Hypothetically, you could short and have more success just based on the lower timeframes because that resistance wall. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of weird shenanigans this weekend. So either way, that's kind of how it goes. That's how we're looking. Those are my thoughts on Bitcoin. Hopefully it makes sense and it resonates with you there. Why don't you comment below and let me know if you feel the same or perhaps feel different. There's no right or wrong answer in trading, okay? All right, let me know. Let's take a look at some altcoins. If you're looking for a new exchange or possibly just want to help support the channel, Bitunix has got you covered. We've been partnered with this exchange for over 2 years. It's been our fan favorite for our community, and the reason why is because they take really good care of you. They offer trading reward bonuses as well as a reduction in fees. Best exchange I would recommend at this point. Link down below for more information. All right, folks, let's jump on into the Ethereum chart and kind of just quickly double check some stuff on the back end here, just to kind of see where we're at. Because when we left off yesterday, 3,900 was somewhat of that resistance wall for us, but we did see a spike up to 4,000 with that liquidation hunt there. So when we look at open interest, there's a ton of open interest between 3,850 and 3,900. We've talked about that previously being a strong support range. So just be mindful that we're traveling into that range and that there's decent propensity to respond correctly or positively to this short-term downtrend. Okay, so we should likely see some bottoming pressure, but the thing I don't love to see here, and this is consistent on this coin and a handful of altcoins too, I don't recommend trading coins like that look like this here, for example, is the liquidation short delta still pretty high. In other words, even though we've been making higher highs and higher lows, we still have more shorts than longs in the market, and we're seeing that suppression under that $4,000 range. When we look on the left-hand side, last 7 days, there's not a lot here locally either, and generally I don't really like to trade coins that have no liquidation in the general vicinity there. I'm sure if we zoom in, we'll see that, of course, but for the most part, that's kind of what we're looking at for the bird's eye view. If we take a quick look at the back end here, and kind of compare ETH versus Bitcoin, we can see ETH is pulling back a little bit harder than Bitcoin is, but also rallied up a lot harder prior to that as well. So we saw a stronger increase here locally, but a stronger decrease here as well. So ETH is in a lot of ways one-to-one with Bitcoin, but it's moving up 2x and moving down 2x of Bitcoin too. So just be mindful of that volatility for this coin. And we take a look here at the descending trend line. We still haven't broken this officially because I like to kind of consider being above the 20-day SMA and the 50-day SMA for like a 48-hour period if possible. And we peaked above, now we're peaking below. This isn't really a great sign. So the descending trend is still holding, for lack of better terms. Daily time frame tells us here that we're under all moving averages and that we're still under 50 on the RSI. There's not really a lot here telling me that this is worth taking a long or a short on at this point. But I can tell you that in general, when you see these type of patterns here play out, they do generally break to the downside because we're consistently retesting the support versus that of a descending trend. So until we shift that dynamic and we start to establish higher highs and higher lows, i.e. close above 4,000, there's really no reason to consider taking along with this coin unless you use super tight margins. And those aren't kind of the kind of trades that I like to take personally, even though we've been forced lately to take a lot more tighter trades, right? Obviously, the trades we've been taking lately, we're having really tight profit targets. So it's just it's the way of the world right now, folks. Crypto is unique and very volatile, so you got to work within tighter margins. All right, let's go ahead and take a look next at Solana. So Solana is as follows. On lower time frames, we're starting to see, once again, kind of a similar structure to Bitcoin, having difficulty closing above this 192 range. We talked about that being a resistance level for us yesterday, partially because there's open interest and basically the point of control above the price, but we can also see a pretty obvious, like, a line on the sand here, right? It's like, you shall not pass this level. You can try, but we won't succeed. So that's kind of where we're at there for the moment for Solana. For a bumper sticker version, we dive in a little bit deeper. We can see 192 was that previous area of open interest, still is essentially, but we've got 185, 184 as that secondary. So the price does end up pulling back. 185 seems like a practical consideration, but once again, this is an impractical trading environment, folks. So I wouldn't recommend just taking a trade because I feel like an open interest range might be a good support. All that said, liquidation delta is at break even. It's having difficulty crossing, it's having trouble establishing a direction or a side. Pick a side, right? It's not doing that. So at this point, not a lot of good content here for Solana because all liquidation outside of 198 has been fully swept here locally. There's a couple of late longs at 185, but the truth is this is not really a good situation. And you're probably going to hear that constant narrative here today based on just the simple fact that, we're in that corrective type of pattern right now, and it's just not fantastic. And we can see Solana's working almost one-to-one ratio with Bitcoin. So, unless you know what Bitcoin's doing, and honestly, at this point, it's difficult to gauge specifically. I feel like we're still going to be a short-term correction for Bitcoin. It's probably best to presume that Solana will pull back too, right? So until that changes the dynamic here and we see a misalignment with these two coins, there's no real reason to consider trading it just because it's your favorite coin, right? If anything is your favorite, you're probably doing it wrong because that's an emotional attachment, right? So try not to attach emotions to trading. You're going to be a lot more successful. So those are my thoughts on Solana. What are yours? Comment below. All right, taking a look here at SUI, seeing what's going on. Quickly to note with SUI, we are looking at a descending trend here. We can see we're still underneath all moving averages. And yesterday we talked about 245 being that macro support range. So we're just consolidating in that level. So from a spot bag perspective, 245 is a decent area to consider averaging in because if Bitcoin can successfully remove its head from its ass, we can get some kind of awesomeness here with the tariffs here next week, roughly, with that next conversation from Trump and the president of China, then we're going to be in much better shape. Between now and then, I think stuck on stupid is pretty much the best way to describe the crypto market, and SUI is no exception for the moment. We'll see if we can identify anything different, but 255 and 260 is still that heavy resistance wall for us. Liquidation short delta is still quite high to the downside, and we don't have a ton of liquidation directly above or below. Now, granted, there's big pockets at 270 and 225, but those are pretty far away, all things considered. So technically 225 is a little closer than 270. So with us being right at 245, we could see us sweep that lower liquidation level. So maybe consider having some limit orders below the price on a spot bag if you want to average into this coin. Okay. But between now and then, there's nothing here on the daily time frame or 4-hour time frame that's like, wow, you should totally go long or go short right now. Okay, because if you take a short, well, actually, short might be a better consideration just because of the fact that we're consistently consolidating below this range here. So if you see our previous low is 245, local low 245, but now the local high is 245. That does imply further downside and rejection lower. So I'm going to restate that here and recant my statement of don't trade this coin. If you're going to trade, a short makes a little bit more sense from a macro perspective. However, folks, this coin is extremely volatile, has a very strong propensity of just squeezing the hell out of shorts and longs at the same time. So trade with caution if you're going to consider a short. But once more, we take a look at this local point of control. 250 is that level. So we can see a strong resistance at 250. So if we can't seem to reclaim 250, a short consideration to the downside would be a little bit better of a call, right? So once more, you're just slightly less risky to consider a short than a long at this point. But the concept remains the same. SUI is a risky coin to trade in general, especially in situations like this. So I don't necessarily recommend it. Taking a look here at the chart though, the comparison, we can see that SUI, while it's pulling back quite significant right now, has a pretty large fair value gap as low as 241. It's performing slightly better than Bitcoin as far as its uptrend, but its downtrends are still pretty hard. So again, you see this kind of ugliness between the two coins. You probably shouldn't try to trade it. Again, sit on the sidelines. There's nothing wrong with taking a day or two off from trading. Okay, folks, go pet your dog, go, lick some grass or whatever it is that you do to make you happy. Go for a walk. Change the dynamic. This is not a coin to trade for the moment, right? Those are just my thoughts. If you differ in opinion, feel free to let me know. Maybe you see some kind of hidden convergence. All right, taking a look here next at XRP. This is the only exception to this narrative here today of saying that everything's mostly bearish and going to pull back. XRP has propensity to go higher. And it's not just because we secured profits on our XRP long, right? We hit 31% there. I think we took a long from, an average price of like 235 to 245. But what I want to get at here is that this coin was showing significant convergence, and that's why we took the trade, right? That's a simple way to understand it. So if you saw my video from yesterday, congrats on that. Let's talk about why this may continue to progress higher and why this coin may actually do different than what we've seen here so far. First of all, 240, that's kind of our average entry there, our upper range of our entry for our long. We can see 240 is that area of control. In other words, we see a lot of volume there based on open interest between 240 and 235. So that's the support range for XRP. When we take a look at the open interest and or liquidation delta rather, we can see the price action shifting dynamic. So you may not be able to see it on your screen. I know it's kind of low. I can't scroll down any further, but we can see it shifting from 800 million 24 hours ago to 200 million in the red. Of course, this is still a bearish type of scenario, but there's still more shorts than longs in this coin. However, there's a lot less than there was before. Okay, so it tells us that there's a dynamic shift, and there's people wanting to take more longs on this coin than shorts. A lot of that comes with this short squeeze that occurred here between 242 and 245. That's that area of consistency there. In other words, we saw kind of a double top with a breakout. Now, when we look at the charts here today and now at this point, I want to reaffirm that this coin is not bullish whatsoever. Okay, it's short-term bullish. It's the lower time frames were looking good. But the macro structure sucks. Okay, there's no other way around it. We are looking at 255 as that local area of resistance. That is essentially a previous high range. So we saw a previous high range, a lot of consistency at 255. We also want to recognize too that 270 to 275 is that previous support range that's turned to a resistance level. It hasn't been retested as such yet, but that is the new area to consider. The price action will almost 100% guarantee stop and reject out of that level. So I'm highly interested in a short at around 270, 275, but we're going to have to probably wait a little bit to get there. All that said, though, when we take a look at that and then we kind of compare that, a bearish divergence on the macro structure, but a lower time frame convergence, establishing higher highs and higher lows with a potential, let's go ahead and get the right little thing here, with a potential cup and handle pattern here, we're looking pretty solid here for a continuation higher, right? So I think we are due to break out and a potential continuation higher is likely. Just know that once we break 255, best case scenario is 270 to 275, all right? So hypothetically, the price does one of these, we're going to see something like this, all right? A pretty strong rejection off 270. And it's not going to go to the ground floor, of course. I'm just letting you know that in general, that's kind of what we're looking at. All right, so those are my thoughts there on XRP. I'm short-term bullish on this coin. Can it pull back here soon? Yes, it certainly can, but it's got a lot of converging and positive contributing factors here to lead me to believe that it's probably going to go a little bit higher. I would say 255 makes the most sense with a potential rejection there, consolidation, and then a leg up from there. So we're looking for a bullish type of rectangle on the lower time frames, like the hourly, for example, at 255 to identify that breakout. We'll take a look at that here closer again once more tomorrow. But between now and then, XRP has my short-term vote of confidence. All right, folks, hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much again for being an awesome part of my life. Do not forget to take advantage of this exclusive offer through Bitunix. Awesome exchange. Links down below. Everything's there for you. Okay? Have a good rest of your day. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.